Ladies and gentlemen, imagine realizing that someone you trusted, someone you loved, has crossed a line so dark that their cruelty is no longer accidental. It's chosen, deliberate, and terrifying. Picture the quiet moments where your pain fuels their power, where empathy dies and morality disappears, leaving only control, manipulation, and cold calculation. Tonight, we will uncover the 5 terrifying signs that reveal when a narcissist has become pure evil, and more importantly, how recognizing these truths can awaken your strength, reclaim your freedom, and transform your pain into power. Stay with me, because every second could change how you see yourself and the world. At first, narcissism hides behind insecurity. It looks loud, defensive, attention hungry, but still human. Ego-driven narcissism is fueled by the need to feel superior, admired, or validated. The harm they cause often feels reactive, a sharp word here, a manipulation there, usually to protect a fragile self-image. In those early stages, you may excuse their behavior, telling yourself they're wounded, misunderstood, or afraid of being exposed. And sometimes they are. But there comes a turning point that changes everything. That turning point is when ego is no longer enough. The shift begins quietly. They stop reacting and start calculating. They no longer lash out because they feel threatened. They harm because they want to. Cruelty becomes deliberate. Words are chosen carefully. Silences are timed perfectly. Affection is withheld strategically. This is not emotional chaos anymore. It's emotional control. And control feels intoxicating to someone who has learned that power matters more than connection. This is where the danger lies. When narcissism crosses into intentional cruelty, pain becomes a tool. Your reactions are studied, not regretted. Your vulnerability is stored like ammunition, not protected like something sacred. They remember what hurts you, not to avoid it, but to use it later. At this stage, your suffering reassures them of dominance. It proves they still have influence over your emotions, your choices, your sense of self. What makes this shift so devastating is that it's not driven by loss of control, but by choice. They know the damage they are causing. They simply decide it's worth it. That realization shatters the illusion that love, patience, or understanding can fix them, because you cannot heal someone who has discovered that cruelty gives them a sense of power. And when you recognize this shift, something painful but necessary happens inside you. You stop asking why they hurt you, and you start asking why you stayed. That question is not meant to shame you. It's meant to wake you up. Once cruelty becomes intentional, the next transformation is even more unsettling because it removes the last thread of hope you were holding on to. This is the moment empathy doesn't just weaken, it disappears. Not in flashes, not on bad days, but completely. You begin to realize that nothing you say reaches them anymore. Not because they don't understand, but because they no longer care. At first, you keep explaining yourself. You choose your words carefully, thinking maybe if you say it the right way, they'll finally see your pain. You cry, you reason, you try to connect, but their eyes stay cold, distracted, sometimes even amused. It feels like talking to someone behind glass. They can see you, hear you, and yet remain untouched. Your emotions stop being meaningful to them and start becoming irrelevant noise. This loss of empathy changes the entire dynamic. Before, you believed there was still a human core inside them that could be reached. Now you realize that empathy would only slow them down, and slowing down would interfere with their sense of control. Compassion requires accountability, and accountability threatens the identity they are protecting at all costs. What hurts most is how deliberate this absence feels. They can show empathy when it benefits them, when there's an audience, when it helps maintain an image, but when you are alone, vulnerable, and raw, there is nothing. No comfort, no remorse, no concern. And that contrast is devastating because it reveals that empathy was never missing. It was withheld. In that realization, something breaks inside you. You stop feeling seen. You start doubting whether your pain even matters, and that doubt slowly eats away at your self-worth. This is how the damage deepens, not through shouting or violence, but through emotional abandonment. Being ignored in your suffering teaches you a cruel lesson that love does not live here anymore. And when empathy is gone, cruelty no longer needs excuses. It stands on its own, unchallenged and dangerously free. When empathy disappears, something unnatural takes its place. The absence doesn't remain empty for long. It gets filled with pleasure. And this is where the realization becomes truly terrifying. You begin to sense that your pain is no longer ignored, it is observed, watched, absorbed. There is a shift in their energy when you're breaking down, a calm that feels wrong, almost satisfied. Your suffering no longer inconveniences them, it fuels them. At first, you tell yourself you're imagining it. No one could actually enjoy this, you think. But patterns don't lie. The more distressed you become, the more composed they appear. The more you beg for understanding, the more distant and powerful they seem. It's as if your tears reassure them that they still matter, that they still have control over something, over you. Pain becomes proof of dominance. This is not emotional detachment, it is emotional consumption. Your reactions are not accidents anymore, they are rewards. Every tear, every anxious message, every moment of self-doubt feeds an inner hunger. The most disturbing part is how subtle it can be. A slight smirk, a delayed response, a cold calm where concern should be, enough to make you feel crazy for noticing, but real enough to haunt you long after. This is where the trauma deepens. You start policing your own emotions, afraid that showing pain will give them exactly what they want. You shrink yourself, silence yourself, hoping that if you suffer quietly enough, it will stop. But it doesn't, because the goal was never resolution. It was control through emotional imbalance. When someone derives power from your suffering, love has already died. What remains is a predator-prey dynamic disguised as a relationship. And once you see that truth, the illusion of mutual care collapses completely. You are no longer dealing with someone who lacks emotional skills. You are facing someone who has learned that hurting you makes them feel alive. That realization changes everything because it tells you something vital. This was never about you being too sensitive. It was about them needing your pain to feel powerful. When someone begins to draw strength from your suffering, the final internal barrier collapses almost silently. The sense of right and wrong. Morality doesn't shatter in one dramatic moment. It erodes, slowly, conveniently, until one day you realize there are no lines left they won't cross, no promise too sacred, no betrayal too cruel. And what makes it chilling is not just what they do, but how little it seems to Eck them. You start noticing it in small ways, lies told without hesitation, commitments broken without explanation, boundaries violated and then mocked. When confronted, there is no guilt in their eyes, only irritation that you dared to question them. They don't wrestle with their conscience because their conscience has been rewritten to serve them. Anything that benefits them is justified. Anything that hurts you is minimized, denied, or twisted into something you deserved. This is where accountability disappears entirely. Instead of reflection, there is retaliation. Instead of remorse, there is rage. They don't ask themselves, was this wrong? They ask, did I get what I wanted? And if the answer is yes, the method no longer matters. Ethics become flexible. Loyalty becomes optional. Your pain becomes irrelevant. What's especially damaging is how confidently they rewrite reality. They betray you and insist you're dramatic. They harm you and claim you provoked it. They violate your trust and accuse you of being controlling for noticing. This moral inversion is not confusion, it's strategy. If they can erase the concept of wrongdoing, they never have to face who they become. And slowly that distortion seeps into you. You begin questioning your own values. You wonder if you're asking for too much, feeling too deeply, expecting too much decency. That's the quiet devastation of moral erosion. It doesn't just free them from guilt, it traps you in self-doubt. When someone loses their moral compass without remorse, cruelty no longer needs excuses. It becomes normalized, repeated, and defended. And at that point, you are no longer in a relationship built on shared humanity. You are standing in the presence of someone who has chosen power over principles and control over conscience. When morality disappears, there is nothing left to hide behind. And that's when the final transformation reveals itself. The victim mask falls away. The stories of being misunderstood, mistreated, or wounded no longer serve a purpose. What emerges instead is something far more dangerous, a predator mindset. You feel it the moment the roles reverse completely. They are no longer defending themselves against imagined harm. They are hunting for advantage. In the beginning, they once cried about how others hurt them. Now they speak with cold certainty about how easily people can be controlled. Their tone changes, their patience becomes strategic, their kindness turns calculated. You notice how they provoke reactions just to study them, how they push limits to see how far they can go. This isn't emotional immaturity anymore, it's dominance testing. What makes this shift so unsettling is the confidence behind it. Predators don't panic, they don't explain themselves. They move calmly, knowing exactly what they're doing. They sense your empathy, your hope, your desire for peace, and they exploit it. Your goodness becomes predictable. Your forgiveness becomes permission. And slowly, they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. This is when fear enters the room, even if no threats are spoken. You feel watched emotionally, studied, managed. Conversations stop being conversations and start feeling like traps. Every reaction you give teaches them something. Every boundary you try to set becomes a challenge they want to break, not respect. And the most painful realization arrives quietly. They are no longer trying to be loved. They are trying to win, to dominate, to own the emotional terrain so completely that you forget who you were before them. In a predator's world, compassion is weakness, vulnerability is leverage, and love is irrelevant. Recognizing this shift is terrifying, but it's also liberating because predators don't change, but prey can escape. The moment you see that you are no longer dealing with a wounded soul, but with someone who feeds on power, the question stops being how to fix them and becomes how to protect yourself. And that moment, as frightening as it feels, is the beginning of your freedom. Once the predator mindset takes hold, connection stops being the goal altogether. Control replaces it completely. You feel this shift in the way closeness disappears, but authority tightens. They are no longer interested in understanding you, supporting you, or growing together. What they want is certainty. Certainty that they can influence your emotions, your decisions, your sense of reality. Control feels safer to them than intimacy ever did. You notice how conversations become one-sided. Your thoughts are interrupted, dismissed, or redirected. Your feelings are inconvenient unless they can be used. Affection is no longer freely given. It is rationed, earned, withdrawn, then dangled again. This is not distance. It is conditioning, like a switch being turned on and off to keep you guessing, hoping, waiting. Because uncertainty weakens you, and weakness makes control easier. At this stage, they don't need to raise their voice. Silence becomes the weapon. Disapproval becomes punishment. Approval becomes a reward. You find yourself measuring every word, every reaction, trying to avoid setting them off or losing whatever scraps of connection remain. Without realizing it, you begin orbiting their moods. Your inner world shrinks as theirs dominates the space. What's heartbreaking is how natural this can start to feel. Humans are wired for connection, so when it's replaced with control, you blame yourself for feeling lonely. You try harder, you give more, you bend further, and they let you because control thrives on imbalance. The less you ask for, the more powerful they feel. This is the point where love is completely hollowed out. Connection requires mutual vulnerability. Control requires submission. They cannot coexist. And the more control they gain, the less human the relationship becomes. You are no longer a partner, you are a variable they manage. But here is the quiet truth hidden beneath the fear. Control only works when you believe you need their approval to survive. The moment you start reclaiming your inner authority, your values, your voice, your right to exist without permission, their power weakens because control is an illusion sustained by your compliance. And the moment you stop shrinking, the structure begins to crack. As control tightens its grip, a dangerous myth begins to fall apart. The belief that this is simply who they are, that it's a personality flaw, a disorder, something fixed and unavoidable. But what you start to see slowly and painfully is that what you're witnessing is not just temperament, it is choice, repeated, conscious, willful. And that realization is both terrifying and clarifying because personality may explain tendencies, but it does not excuse decisions. They know when they are hurting you. They know when they are lying. They know when they are crossing a line. And yet, time and time again, they choose the path that benefits them most, regardless of the damage it causes. That is where the word evil begins to make sense, not as a dramatic label, but as a moral one. You notice it in the moments where they could stop but don't, when they could soften but harden instead. When they see your exhaustion, your fear, your tears, and continue anyway, these are not reflexes. These are decisions. And the pattern of those decisions reveals their values more clearly than any apology ever could. What makes this so hard to accept is that acknowledging choice means releasing hope. Hope that if you love them better, explain more clearly, endure a little longer, something will change. But choice means they already know the cost, and they've decided it's acceptable. Your pain is not a misunderstanding, it's a price they're willing to let you pay. And this is where your power begins to return. Because if this is about choice, then so is yours. You are no longer obligated to stay loyal to someone who consistently chooses to harm you. You are not cruel for walking away from cruelty. You are not heartless for refusing to sacrifice yourself on the altar of someone else's comfort. Seeing this truth hurts, but it also frees you. It shifts the question from, what's wrong with them, to what am I choosing now? And in that moment, the story stops being about their darkness and starts becoming about your awakening. When you begin to see their behavior as a series of choices, another painful truth rises to the surface. The damage they've caused doesn't end with the moments of cruelty. It lives on inside you, quietly, deeply, often invisibly. This is the part no one warns you about, how surviving someone like this can fracture your sense of self long after the relationship itself begins to crumble. You notice it in the way you second guess everything, your thoughts, your memories, your instincts. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood, if you overacted, if you imagined the harm. Their constant rewriting of reality didn't just confuse you in the moment, it trained you to distrust your own perception. And that is one of the deepest wounds of all. Slowly, your self-worth erodes, not because you were weak, but because you were exposed to sustained emotional distortion. When someone consistently dismisses your feelings, invalidates your truth, and punishes your honesty, your inner voice grows quieter. You stop advocating for yourself. You start believing that your needs are too much, your boundaries unreasonable, your pain inconvenient. What makes this damage so devastating is how silent it is. There are no visible scars. From the outside, you may look fine, but inside, you're carrying the weight of self-doubt, hypervigilance, and emotional exhaustion. You're still bracing for impact even when the threat is gone. And yet, this awareness marks a turning point, because recognizing the damage means recognizing that what happened to you was real, it was harmful, and it mattered. You didn't lose yourself because you were flawed. You lost pieces of yourself trying to survive someone who made you question your right to exist as you were. Healing begins the moment you stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start asking, why did I tolerate being diminished? That shift is powerful because it transforms shame into clarity and pain into wisdom. And in that clarity, you begin the slow, courageous work of reclaiming yourself. Not as you were before, but as someone stronger, more aware, and finally rooted in truth. As you begin reclaiming your sense of self, another realization emerges, quiet at first, almost guilty, the understanding that staying is no longer loyalty and leaving is no longer cruelty. For so long, you were taught to equate endurance with love, sacrifice with strength, silence with maturity. We were made to believe that walking away meant you failed, gave up, or betrayed something sacred. But survival has a way of rewriting those definitions. You start to notice how much energy it takes just to exist near them, how your body is always tense, how peace feels unfamiliar, even suspicious. You realize you are not healing because the wound is still being reopened every time you stay. And slowly, painfully, the truth settles in. This environment is incompatible with your well-being. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. Leaving doesn't arrive as a dramatic decision. It arrives as exhaustion, as the moment you realize love should not feel like self-erasure, as the moment you understand that protecting yourself is not an attack on someone else. You didn't change, you woke up. What's hardest is releasing the version of yourself that believed you could save them. That hope was born from compassion, not foolishness. But compassion without safety becomes self-destruction. And choosing to live is not betrayal, it's self-respect. you begin to see that staying loyal to someone who harms you requires betraying yourself daily. Your values, your voice, your right to peace. Leaving then becomes an act of alignment, choosing truth over illusion, dignity over fear, life over survival mode. And yes, they may call you selfish, cold, ungrateful. That is the final manipulation, trying to make your freedom feel like a crime. But deep down, you know the truth. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you finally started. This moment is not the end of your story. It's the moment you step out of the darkness and choose yourself without apology. Not because you were weak, but because you are finally strong enough to survive. And as you step away, a final, profound truth begins to take shape. The moment you realize that your strength, your resilience, your survival is not just personal victory, but a beacon for others. The trauma you endured was not in vain. Every tear you shed, every fear you faced, every boundary you defended has prepared you to become a guide, a warning, and a source of hope for those still trapped in the shadows of someone else's cruelty. You understand now that evil may have chosen you as its target, but it cannot dictate your legacy. You survived not because you were lucky, but because you refused to surrender to the narrative they tried to write for you. Each choice you make to reclaim yourself chips away at the power they once held over you. Your life, once dictated by their manipulations, begins to follow your own rhythm again. And in that rhythm, you feel something that was long denied: clarity, peace, and the undeniable proof that you are capable of thriving beyond their influence. What is most remarkable is how this awareness transforms your perspective on human connection. You start valuing authenticity over pretense, empathy over control, and truth over comfort. You notice the subtle power of genuine relationships, of kindness offered freely, and of boundaries respected. And in doing so, you realize that surviving evil has taught you to recognize good, to nurture it, and to protect it fiercely. Your journey becomes a story, one that others can follow, one that whispers, "You are not alone. You can leave. You can heal. You can reclaim your life." And that, more than anything, is the true triumph that even in the wake of someone who chose cruelty, you can emerge whole, empowered, and luminous. Because the darkest experiences do not have to define you. They can refine you, illuminate your courage, and awaken the indomitable strength that was within you all along. And that is how the story ends, not with despair, but with the undeniable, unshakable truth that you survived, you chose yourself, and you will never be diminished again. In the end, surviving someone who has crossed into darkness is not just about escape, it's about awakening. Every choice they made to hurt you only revealed your strength, your resilience, and your capacity to rise above cruelty. This journey is proof that love for yourself is more powerful than fear, more lasting than manipulation, and more meaningful than their illusions of control. As you reclaim your life, remember, the darkness you endured cannot define you, but the courage you show can inspire others. Stay with this journey because the lessons you'll carry will change how you see strength, survival, and freedom forever.